Now, some grade 12 pupils say they feel robbed by the 2020 academic year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. They say they could have done better ahead of the release of their results if they had attended contact lessons all year round. Now, we do have our guest that we're going to be talking to today to explore the upcoming Matric results. We're joined by Kobus Maree, a lecturer at the University of Pretoria. Very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for your time. I mean, we saw the results coming out from the IEB examinations, a rather impressive 98.07, even though it is slightly down from the previous year's results. How do you think the Matric results for this year are going to be looking, the rest of them at least?
Good afternoon, and thank you for your introduction. Look, I think it's pretty much common knowledge that we're expecting not so sizable, but probably a minor drop in the average mark, as we saw in the case of the IEB outcomes. But I'm not expecting something substantial, something very sizable. Then, regarding your comments, of course, it was the most challenging year for all and sundry. And our learners have reason to believe that, well, maybe in a different environment, they might have achieved different outcomes. What I suggest is, let's put the past behind us now and just look forward. What has happened has happened. There's nothing we can do about the past. Let's focus on the future. So there's a lot of hope still. I mean, to start with, want everybody to forget about using the word fail ever again. If the marks were slightly lower than what was the case last year, remember, everybody had to deal with the same kinds of circumstances. So I'm upbeat. I don't think we need to be overly concerned. You know, the sun will come up again tomorrow. The earth will keep on turning, etc.
That certainly is a very positive perspective, especially during this time when learners are already very pressurized. But how do you believe COVID-19 is actually going to affect the quality of the matriculation pass rates? We know that students who are wanting to go to university will need that degree university entrance. Those who want to go to TVET colleges, who want to do their diplomas and certificates will also need the requisite marks. Do you anticipate perhaps a reduction in entries to institutions of higher learning?
I don't. I really don't. Thank you for raising that question. Look, as many people have said during the past few days, people tend to put a much too strong emphasis on grade 12 itself. What's actually happening is we're looking at the outcomes of 12 years of study. In certain instances, maybe 13 years of study, could be 14. So what has happened is, yes, many challenges were experienced. But look, during a normal, if we want to use that word, normal year, only between 8 and 9 months are in any effect utilized, if not fewer than that, to complete grade 12. I think we can safely state that the core syllabus, or syllabi, the plural, have been covered in any event. I doubt that the outcomes will be significantly lower, like I said. I believe that people will, in general, those that have worked hard, achieve the outcomes they were hoping for to a large extent. My big concern, let me be very honest, is many people in rural and township areas, is the old story, the fault lines that characterize our education system. People with poverty were harshly affected, much harder than people with affluence. And I'm not talking about white or black or anything. I'm talking in terms of schools with resources. You are aware that many schools, even prior to 2020, schools, well-resourced schools, were already involved in online teaching and learning. Now, those learners clearly had access to the inside lane. My concern rests in the following comment. People that have been disadvantaged to a much greater extent than people in a different position. That is my concern. I am afraid that maybe the stats will not show that people that had been struggling would have been more adversely affected. And I think I can confirm that in many instances, last year, many schools were unable to facilitate online teaching and learning.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to switch to different kinds of modes like we used in the past. Likewise now, people from affluent schools, they've acquired vital ICT-related skills that will stand them in great stead. And again, people in rural areas, people in less affluent areas where the resources are very scarce, they would not have been allowed the kind of access that many others have. That is my grave concern.
And Professor, you bring up a very important point there, the issue of access to class because of class or financial resources. But what can be the learnings that can be taken out for the class of 2021? We are still in the midst of the pandemic. Yes, there's a vaccine. It's still in the process of being rolled out and also still being tested. But should the situation persist any longer, how can the class of 2021 be positioned to perhaps do better than the class of 2020 in similar type of situations as far as the health environment is concerned?
That's a great observation. Look, we're not going to be caught off guard again. We have learned many lessons. The basic strategies, the controllables to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, basic things like sanitizing, like keeping your social distance, etc., etc. We now know that probably we're never going to go back to what used to be referred to as normal. We know that things have changed. Number one, accept change as the new normal. Change is going to happen rapidly. Fundamental change will happen until the end of your days and mine. They can take that with them. They've learned that the sun did come up the next morning after the lockdown was announced. They all saw that, yes, whereas many people passed on from the pandemic, life still goes on. And it's one of those things that I've seen in many, many instances, especially then in rural areas, the resilience that is truly deeply inspiring. You know what, teachers that have very little access to resources, that would go out of their way to teach on a Saturday, in online or in blended format, people that really did their very best. And I urge all the media, please, report on those stories. Yes, salute the guys that have achieved, the males and the females that have attained 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 distinctions. That's wonderful. We need people. The economy desperately needs people. But we need you to report on the heroic stories of teachers that went out of their way to facilitate teaching where teaching was at its most.
And Professor, there's so many of those particular stories, and you bring up such an awesome point there and a word of encouragement that even in times of adversity, those times of adversity can also be times of opportunity where you bring out the best in yourself that you ordinarily would not have. Thank you so much for your perspective and your insight this afternoon. That's lecturer there, Professor Kobus Maree.